There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
This is very exciting to be here with Bernie of Bookstagram fame. Bernie and I are here to talk about Hernan Diaz's debut novel, In the Distance, which was published in 2017. And Bernie has it, and no, it is not a mirror image. You're screwed up on the video. That's what the cover looks like. Bernie, hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Sean.
Well, thanks for, I think it was you that suggested it. I'm going to blame you.
Anyway. We were trying to brainstorm a book to buddy read, and Trust came out, and then our conversation was led to In the Distance. We both wanted to read it, and so it was fate.
We are. Yeah. If people that are watching that care about spoilers, we're not going to get into anything spoilery until later in this broadcast, and we'll give you ample warning when we're moving into that territory. So you can relax and enjoy at least the first part of this chat, because we're not going to get into spoilers. Yes, you have the physical book. I read it on ebook, and I will certainly be tracking down a physical copy in due course, which betrays a little bit of
it does. I was just thinking that.
Well, maybe I want to do some ritual, something, throw it across the room for a short YouTube video or something. But I'd like to start with each of us giving a brief comment about whether we liked it or not and why, but just briefly, and then we'll get into the weeds. So Bernie, why don't you start?
So I liked it a lot. I think it's going to end up in my top 10 reads of the year. I liked it that much. I've actually, strangely, have been reading Westerns this year. So I've also read Lonesome Dove this year. I read Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy this year. So there's been a bunch of different varieties of Westerns that I've been experiencing. And this one definitely evolved my understanding of how a Western can work. And it also played to some of my preferences as a reader, some of my favorite things I think it did. And so I'm excited to talk about some of those.
Oh, awesome. Now I was just about to quip, and in fact I am going to quip, that I'm not sure I'm butch enough for this conversation after hearing about all the butch, masculine, dude bro novels you've been reading this year. But in fact, that is part of what I think Hernan Diaz is playing with, is all that aesthetic, and we're going to get into that. I loved it too. This was a 5-star read for me. It may be in my top 10 too, but it certainly made a deep impression on me. And it's the kind of book, both in subject matter and in the terms of what actually happens in the story, the plot, that is not particularly a Sean book. I don't deal well with literature that's about the Robinson Crusoe narratives. I've always had trouble staying awake through those, and I didn't have that trouble with this one. So that was awesome. Yeah, I loved it too. So let me give everybody a sense of the opening premise. The story opens with the main character, whose Swedish name I believe is pronounced Håkan, and everybody calls him Hawk. So I will do that from here on in, because it's much easier to say. He's an old man. He's on a ship that's on its way up to Alaska, and the ship has gotten stuck in the ice. He goes out onto the ice and takes an ice bath, and all the other people are looking at him and talking about what a strange old man he is from the ship. And then he comes back up onto the ship, and we kind of get a sense of that everyone thinks he's kind of mysterious. He's extremely tall, and nobody really knows what his story is. And in fact, that's how the first chapter ends, is that he sits down and starts to tell them and us, the readers, the story of his life. And then we go back to the opening, his childhood in Sweden, and I'll just say a sentence or two about that, and that's enough for the opening premise, which is that he and his brother grew up in a very poor family. It's almost like a serf type situation. They live on a manor estate, and they don't have two sticks to rub together. But through some underhanded dealings on the parents' part that I applauded, they got enough money to give their two sons passage to North America to start a new life. That is, I think, the opening premise. Would you like to add anything or correct anything there, Bernie?
I think the fact that they were going to New York is important.
They were going to New York, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And then life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. How should we get into this? What do you want to start with?
I want to start by just like commenting that people have been telling me to read this book for years, like ever since I became a Bookstagrammer and became a part of the Bookstagram community. Bookstagrammers were telling me that like if there was ever a book that I needed to read, it was this one, like that I had to read it. And that had me very, very excited, but also very, very nervous because, you know, like when a book gets so much hype, it's like, oh no, like either I'm not going to like it, or because I don't like it, and then like, you know, what's everybody going to think, or I'm not going to like it because it's hyped. And so it's been several years since the initial push to read this book. So I have a little bit of a distance from that. And
I see what you did there. You have a little bit of distance from in the distance. And for me, I heard mixed reviews when it came out. I remember hearing about it being talked about on maybe BookTube. I don't remember, but certainly on different bookish podcasts. And I heard glowing reviews of it, and I heard others that were less glowing. And then I read what it was about, and I thought, this doesn't really sound like a Sean book. So I was really glad that you suggested it, because it very much was. Shall we start by talking about how this plays with the genre of the Western?
Sure. Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, I want you to start, but let me just put this in as and then bounce off this. I read an interview with him in the Paris Review where the verb he used was, in this novel, he was attempting to hijack the genre of the Western.
Yeah, it definitely hijacks the genre. And like I said, I've been for some reason, I've just been reading Westerns this year. I also teach a Western film in a class that I teach on race and gender. So it's like fitting that way. The Searchers, it's an old John Wayne film. There are some literal ways in which the Western trope is subverted that we could talk about, like post spoilers. I think it subverts the Western as a genre in a bunch of ways. So I guess I'll just like pitch one, and then we could talk about it, and then maybe you could pitch another one and we could talk about it. But first off, having just read Lonesome Dove, which is an expansive, gigantic novel, the scope of the novel is so grand. This is very, very focused. It's focused on a single character. I mean, there are obviously other characters that come into play, but this really focuses on this one character and like his mind, inside his mind, which I think is different from the other Westerns that I have read. And it focuses in on his mind, but also like his very empathetic mind. Like he's a very empathetic person, and that for like not just to humans, to animals and to the land. And I think that's my favorite part of the book. I'm assuming it's part of why it's a Sean book as opposed to a Western. But that's the thing that really, really sold it for me.
Absolutely. And if you'll just bear with me, he had a great line in this Paris Review interview. Yeah, what I loved about this book, and this is a quote from his interview in the Paris Review, he says, "Most Westerns treat violence with indifference and brash frivolity. And one of the hardest things to do in this book was to convey Hawkins' enormous feeling of responsibility for his actions." So on this journey, whichever direction he's going, he gets into situations where, in order to defend himself or whatever, he has to act violently. I think one of the deepest parts of the book, at least for me as the reader, was the effect of that violence on his psyche. And what I just read, I mean, that's the difference, right? That's what I can't stand about what the Western genre is, that it's just, it's frivolous. The violence is frivolous. Yeah, it's the perfect word. So that's what made this a Sean book, just to carry on from what you were saying. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, I mean, the two Westerns that I read this year, Lonesome Dove and Blood Meridian, I think try to challenge that in different ways too, but I don't think it's impactful in a different way in the distance. Like Blood Meridian is extremely, extremely violent, but it's cut through with the language that McCarthy writes with, which is like devastatingly beautiful. And Lonesome Dove, I think also Larry McMurtry tries to challenge these things too, but different. So I'm going to stop talking about those two books, but I just wanted to clarify that like everything that I say about this book isn't in like opposition to those two books. I just think it's interesting about them together.
That is a good point.
I think another thing that I think stands out about this is like a sense of solitude that's experienced. I mean, I think Westerns in general, like that explore that journey, explore solitude, but I think that the solitude, and I really like the whole idea of just being, how by him moving through the land the way that he does. Again, I resisted because of the spoiler potential, but I think that like the nature of just being, I think, is also very, 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 very interesting, because it presents the world as this dangerous, vast, big place, but it also connects him to that place. So it's not like the landscape isn't like an other. The landscape is like just like a part of being, and he's a part of that. Does that make sense?
Well, it totally does. And I have struggled to stay awake through those kinds of stories in the past, Robinson Crusoe or whatever, because I didn't feel it in the way that it's represented so viscerally here. Like his interior life in those years and years, decades of solitude. He had such a rich interior life. Not always, but often. And just the way that the description of how he would occupy his time was fascinating to read about. And the things that he learned, and his thought processes and his reflections on his past and on his brother and so on. I didn't mark very many quotes, but I think I marked one. That land, its beasts and plants, had fed him for such a long time that it had become, in a strict sense, part of his body.
Yes. Right. Have you read Braiding Sweetgrass? I might have asked you this before.
No, I haven't. I very much want to.
Robin Wall Kimmerer, who's the writer of that book, and for those who don't know, she's an Indigenous American writer who's also a scientist, a biologist, and so she kind of writes between those. She writes about a human's relationship to the earth at those intersections. So between indigenous wisdom and biology as a science, as like a studied science. And throughout the entire book, like the reoccurring theme is this idea of reciprocity, about how like humans and nature and animals are all connected through like in like every single way. And I actually appreciated how that idea was interwoven into this text, and the quote that you just read made me think of that.
And I hesitate to use the verb indigenize because I don't know what the hell it means exactly, and I don't think that as a white guy I should even be bandying that word about, but it couldn't help occur to me at various points in this story that in temperament and in perspective, that his personality, his character was developing in a way that was closer, more akin to indigenous experience of America than it was the settler experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I don't want to say any more than that because I don't want to say something really stupid. So
that's a great point.
That did occur to me. There was lots going on, even if it was just him walking across America.
Mm-hmm.
Something else that's interesting to me is the fact that he arrived in America not speaking English. Mm-hmm. And I like the way that Diaz showed that. So he doesn't let the reader know anything that Hawke doesn't understand. I mean, if we pay close attention to the details he's describing, we can usually figure it out. But he really showed that, and the acquisition of language as a process of the development of his character. I thought that was really well done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I thought so too. I really appreciated that.
Yeah.
I did feel like, and this is actually another way that this is related to the earlier conversation about how I think it subverts the Western trope, but like in the beginning of his journey, especially when he escapes, are we allowed to mention that? Because that happens early on, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, when
he's
he's taken on early on in the novel by this woman as her kind of like boy toy.
Boy toy.
And he gets an opportunity to escape, and he escapes, and that's kind of like when the real like Western part of this book begins for him. Like that's where like his like individual journey begins out on the landscape. And for I would say for like a really large chunk of time, not always, but a large amount of the book, every encounter that he has with somebody who he stumbles upon is really just humane. You know what I mean? Like, or I don't know if humane's the right word, but it's empathetic. I don't know. It's very beautiful. Like it's, you know, his instinct is to help rather than to protect him.
Absolutely. I absolutely loved this character. I loved the fact that his empathy was so intrinsic to his character. And I would just add to what you said is that he comes from that humane place, that empathetic place, but a lot of the people he encounters are bad settler people. Mm-hmm. Holy smokes. And I don't know if it's important overall, but I just can't not delve into this with you. What did you make of that woman that has him as her boy toy? And there was something filmic and distorted and just so incredibly bizarre about that part of the story that was spellbinding. Like, what was that? What was she doing? Who? What? Explain it to me if you can.
Well, I think he was vague with that on purpose. Because I really don't know what exactly her. Like I don't know what her role was, but she had a role. She was significant in that community. She had power, and you know, people were afraid of her. And if you know, if she didn't like, you know, what you did, you were a goner. And
yeah, well, there was that just bizarre kind of the story goes off in another direction where they go out of town somewhere and to another settlement and she gets out, and it seems like this is another of her boy toys that's setting up a new settlement or something. And then she talks to him kind of lovingly, and the next thing you know, shoots him dead. She shoots him, doesn't she?
Yeah, she shoots him right in the head.
She shoots him right between the eyes. And it's just like, this is bizarre.
Yeah.
And then that her chubby sidekick.
Yeah.
He has to take his clothes off, and he's left there. And there's obviously a backstory that, like you say, very vague, but so tantalizing. And then the chubby guy is the guy that is the one who comes back to Clangston and lets Hawk escape.
Yeah, I wonder. Yeah, I just wonder if because it's a very sexual adolescent kind of experience for Hawk, and I just wonder because sexuality is a low key theme that threads throughout. That maybe we could talk about later, but I wonder if there is like a thread between that scene and then what we could talk about later, in how it shapes him and kind of like shapes him early on to then be who he eventually becomes.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting point. The other thing that's really key about him that didn't quite dawn on me, and I'm not sure if I missed signposts or if they weren't there until quite near the end, but I don't think it's a spoiler to say, is that he is extremely tall.
Mm-hmm.
Like to the point where it sounds like it's kind of like giantism.
Yeah.
Did you become aware of that earlier in the book than I did?
No, I don't think it's something that he realized about himself.
Right.
And I think we learned as he learned that he was tall.
And because I did it on ebook, and so I could do a text search for tall, and yeah, it wasn't until very far into the book that there was any remarks about his height, but it seemed like he was close to 7 feet by the end. I mean, nobody gave a number, but it sounded like it was just and without getting into spoilers, he's trying to hide in public, and so he gets he somehow, we won't say how, he gets a big horse, and he doesn't feel as like he sticks out as much riding a really big horse because he doesn't look as tall.
But yeah, I mean, speaking of like his physical characteristics. I also think that like we have like different responses to his attractiveness throughout. So I think like in the beginning he's made to seem very attractive, but that also might have to do with the way that other people respond to him, because then in the end he becomes more monstrous, right? Like, or not monstrous, but like I guess yeah, monstrous. You know, with the height, and that's when like the height's exaggerated a lot, and
Yes.
so I don't. So again, I don't know if what Diaz is doing there is having our perception of his physical characteristics evolve as his reception evolves.
And also how much of that was just his own self-image and how much of it was how other people saw him.
Yeah, because there's a lot of stuff with like mirrors by looking in the
Yeah,
the dust
absolutely.
and the water and the sky and all that stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of self-reflection and self-growth. It is in ways like a Bildungsroman, like a coming of age novel, which I liked. I feel like I don't read a lot of those anymore. But
yeah.
or maybe like books aren't really just aren't advertised like that.
It sounds like a university professor word.
That's what I'm gonna say.
No offense, Professor Bernie, but that I think of 19th century literature when I think of Bildungsroman. I want to introduce something, and if you don't have anything to say for it, I would probably edit it out because I don't have much more to say other than this one point. We have talked about the way that this book subverts, plays with, responds to the genre of the Western, but I'm also curious about the ways in which it plays with 19th century American history. And maybe we would just repeat a lot of the things that we have just said about the way it subverts the Western genre. But I think it's around 1850 when he gets to America. Mm-hmm. And maybe, what would you say, close to the end of the 19th century by the end of the story? Something like that?
Yeah, because he's,
Possibly. Mm-hmm. So the second half of the 19th century, and he is completely unaware, for example, he encounters some soldiers and they're wearing different colored uniforms, but he has no conception of the fact that Civil War has been on or has just ended. He doesn't seem to have a conception of the political anything going on around him. Mm-hmm. But in the way that the narrative proceeds, it seems to me like this is not a standard settler narrative, and it's not the way our high school history textbooks teach us that America was founded.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. The first thing that came to mind when you started talking about this was the whole fact that he migrates from Europe to California. So right. so he migrates from Sweden to England and then goes all the way down under, they stop in Buenos Aires and then they go all the way up to California, and then he moves this way. So it's almost like, while, we have the idea that like technological progress occurred from east to west in the United States, right? In this way, his trajectory as a person and his discoveries, because he's always, discovering things as well, whether it be scientific or technological, when he eventually, it's spoiler territory, but yeah, no. So it's the evolution of all of technology and advancement and all of that stuff occurs differently from how we are taught. And also I like, that's an important point that I didn't even realize until exactly what you mentioned, like the different uniforms. And I was like, oh, the Civil War has been going on when he's out in the West doing his thing. And that's important. I don't really, I'd have to think really hard about it to have some kind of analysis of it, but it's definitely something, something.
I think we should stop teasing our viewers and move into spoiler territory now. So we are now going to move into spoiler territory. If you don't want to watch, because we're going to get into spoilers, please come back later after you've read the book, because we both highly recommend you do.
Mm-hmm.
Bernie.
I was going to ask you when the moment was that you decided you loved the book.
Oh, that's an excellent question. I'm not sure I decided until I got to the end. I think it was the kind of story that and this isn't always the way I read, but I usually know whether I love a book or not before I get to the end, but I needed to see how it ended, because the fact that it was an adventure story on one level, which is not my thing, I thought if it gets off track, if I lose touch with that sense of that warm character that he was, that got so distorted by the ordeals that he had to deal with, and just became kind of more superficial at the end, that would be a real turnoff. But I think really it was when he met Asa. And that's what I'm dying to talk to you now that we're on the other side of the spoiler wall. How gay was that? No, actually, no. Let's save that. I want to hear your answer to your own question. When did you realize that?
What was the horse's name? His first horse that was like his. Pingo? Was it Pingo?
I think so. It was Pingo. Yes.
It started with a P and it had a.
Yeah.
It was something like that.
I can find it very quickly here because I got the ebook.
Yeah, it's Pingo.
Pingo.
I randomly opened to a page and it was there. The way he took care of Pingo, just like really impacted me. And it
beautiful.
It was and even beyond Pingo, then like every encounter that he had with some being that was in any way struggling, like he sacrificed like being alert and being aware of his surroundings to take care of these people or animals. But it wasn't just to like take care, like just the way that Diaz wrote it is very special. Like it was just like, I don't know, like it was like,
I don't know how to put it into words, but it was
this is what he did.
Extraordinarily unique, and touching. He learns from one of the guys he spends some time with. What was his name? The scientist guy. He gets into Lorimer about medical. Basically becomes kind of a pseudo doctor because he's a quick study and he just picks stuff up like that, and then that serves him well for the rest of the story in terms of helping other people, and also in one memorable scene escaping from danger.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
No, I'm actually gonna make I'm transitioning back to what you want to talk about, but there is then
and if I don't like where you're going, I'm just gonna detransition, baby.
He has such a close relationship to the animals. There's a donkey, right? There's a donkey.
Yeah.
And when there's one point when he finds the warmth in Burrow, and they kind of like Burrow lets him sleep against him to like keep them warm. And I think that's like a good transition from
to the Asa story
and go to Asa, because I think
yes, absolutely. So Asa is this guy that rescues him from a situation where he's caught because of this. Well, we can talk a little more freely without telling the viewer everything that happens, but he, in self-defense, when and I didn't understand who the brethren and stuff were. Maybe you can enlighten me, but there's this horrific attack on a caravan of settlers that he's temporarily aligned himself with, and he, in defending himself and others, he discovers the capacity for violence in himself in a way that horrifies him and destabilizes him for the rest of his life. Where I think he was quite morally with he was defending himself and other people, but that was a big thing, and goes back to what we were talking about, violence.
And the attackers are disguised, right?
They're disguised as indigenous, but they're not. And I didn't understand who they actually were. But then years later or months later, he gets arrested for that crime. And one of the people is he a police officer? Anyway, he's connected with the sheriff that's arrested him, helps him escape from this evil, corrupt sheriff. And that's Asa. And how gay was that, Bernie?
I mean, it was very gay in the sense that there was male, just, I don't know, the male relationship was very homoerotic. Right?
And was that just in our own minds, or because it wasn't really on the page other than just human warmth and,
Yes.
and literally warmth to stay warm at night? But Hawk's emotional reaction was very much one of love. And I suppose there would be a defensive straight reader out there that would say, oh, it was just brotherly love. You're always trying to make everything queer. But anyway, I don't really care. I just thought it was beautiful. So,
yeah.
But I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on it.
Well, I think that this conversation is intentional. Like, I think that Diaz was thinking about this conversation when he wrote that, and he knew that this conversation was gonna happen, and he didn't want to give an answer. I don't think. Sorry.
It made me think of the famous Abraham Lincoln and was his name Josiah Speed, where they slept together in the same bed for 13 years or something and wrote kind of romantic letters back and forth, but nobody knows whether there was any more to it.
What? Now, okay, so I've been reading a lot of books at the same time, and if I remember correctly, does Asa come onto him from behind?
Yes, he hugs him from behind, and that's
I think that's
about as explicit as it ever gets.
Yeah, like I think that's a very intentional subtext. Like, like I think that
absolutely.
I think that's the clearest example of him provoking us, of Diaz provoking us.
And Hawk was such an innocent person in terms of his own sexuality. There's also a very tender relationship he has with I think she's probably 14-year-old girl that he was attached to. And we don't, maybe unless you think it's worth dissecting all that, we don't need to say how that story ends, but that he was like, it was like puppy love for him. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if I like that word puppy love, but it was just, there was just an innocence to it that was in some ways, he never had a sexual body the way you and I do.
Well, I mean, and that could also have to do with, again, how he's subverting the trope of tropes about the Western, because we think of the man who's going out to conquer the West, and that's not what his intention is. He wants to go find his brother, right? And so he's not trying to conquer anything. So his sexuality, Diaz presents us his sexuality in a way that, I guess, promotes that.
It's totally in harmony with all the other aspects of his personality, his character. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Which is beautiful.
It was a beautiful section of the book, and the fact that things didn't end well with that was devastating for me. I know we're in spoiler territory, but I don't feel a need to say what happens, but that was quite, and it was had a devastating impact on Hawk, where he went hardcore hermit for a couple decades, I think.
Yeah, for a long time.
Yeah. Where
he literally creates a little world for himself.
The trenches and all. Yeah.
Yep.
Do you want to say anything about the direction that he's heading and stuff? Because that was interesting. And I think you followed that part of the story a lot more clearly than I. Say a little bit about that. Because what you did say was before we started recording. So.
Yeah.
So
I just thought it was really interesting how, and we did kind of touch on it again when we were talking about history, because he migrates from Sweden and then goes around the tip of South America and then up to California, and then he wants his purpose is to move east to get to New York, where he was supposed to be going to find his brother. But then at the moment when he gets arrested, that journey kind of ends, and he realizes that I don't know, like, so much time has gone by that he and his brother are different people, and that, like, that connection isn't really necessary anymore. And I think this also plays into the whole idea of just like kind of like the nature of just being, and like he kind of sees himself as just this being, I keep on saying being, this creature who just exists, is one with, his surroundings and also with time. Like it's just like he is who he is in the present. And so from there, yeah, his journey just becomes like he doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know what time is, and he just he moves back west, but also south, and he's kind of like just moving circularly.
And I never got a sense that he really was. Maybe he was clear whether he was mistaken or not, but certainly reading the book, there was most of it I didn't really know which direction he was going, or whether he was going the right way or whatever. And I think that disorienting effect made it a very unique reading experience. And you were talking about the present. Like, I think Diaz quite consciously starts using that word near the end, the present. He's living in the present, and not using that new age cliche, but or that's pop psychology cliche, but just it's really quite striking the way he shows Hawk's relationship with time.
Mm-hmm.
So, for a massive spoiler, why do you think he's going back to Sweden at the end?
I don't know. I guess another thing that we could think about is he going to get back to Sweden?
Well, is he going to get back, or is he going to end up in Swaziland with his navigational skills? But
and also like he's walking on ice, which across the from Alaska to Russia.
Absolutely. Yeah,
that made me nervous a little bit, to be honest.
Yeah, it was a very striking ending.
Do you have thoughts on why he's going back to Sweden?
Oh, no, I don't. So that's why I asked you, Bernie.
I don't either, really.
I had none, but I thought it was a really kind of fitting ending because it seemed like an impossible journey.
Yeah.
And so much of his journey was impossible. And so it was, I thought, just the perfect ending. And also the little boy that became so captivated by him seemed like it was the next generation of another Hawk.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we have convinced many a viewer to give this novel a try. What I would like to end on, without you spoiling Hernan Diaz's second book, why don't you give us a little bit about it?
Sure. So with his second book, he has proven that he is one of those genius writers who can give you two novels that are extremely different. I think that's one of the most impressive things when a writer has a body of work that is just so different from each other, where the books are all different from each other. And that is like the perfect example between Trust and In the Distance. Trust is more about the structure. It's a seemingly straightforward novel, but it's also a deceptively disjointed novel, but it's not actually disjointed. He's doing something with structure. That's what he's interested in. So when you go into it, I think some people might not want to know that. So just pretend you didn't hear me. But for others, like if you like jump from part one, because there's 4 parts, if you jump between the parts and you're like, what the heck's going on? Like that's the whole point of the book. The point of it's less the story and more of how the stories come together.
And I believe that another way to say what you just said would be that the story is told through the structure. Like, and you have to really, and I'm saying this is somebody who hasn't read the book. I had a bite-sized chat about it that gave me a little bit of what the book's, how it's structured and what it's about, but that it's really told through the structure. So if you're not paying attention to the structure, or if you're confused by the structure, you're not really going to get the story.
Yeah. And it's about finance. Which is very different from this book. And it's about finance, but there's a lot of gender stuff in there as well.
I'm going to definitely try it because this one was a big success for me, and I'm so glad you suggested it. And I think it's my turn to suggest the next one. Maybe a year from now, we'll do this again, or maybe even sooner.
Yeah, but, I'm excited to see what you come up with.
This was fun, Bertie. Thanks so much.
Yes, thanks for having me.